Maris looked at me in the mirror like I was a smudge she could wipe off later. That was the moment it shifted. Not the cheating, not the money, the look. Calm, distant, already gone. My name is Hollis Mercer. I'm 58 years old. I live in Greenville, South Carolina, and I run risk and anti-fraud at Crescent Ridge Events Center. My job trained me to notice patterns. Who lies, who forgets on purpose, who repeats the same accident until it's not an accident anymore. The funny part is, I spent almost 2 years at home pretending I didn't see the pattern sitting at my own kitchen table. Not because I was blind, because I didn't want my kids paying for what I was afraid to admit. That Monday, September 23rd, I walked in after a long event loadout and found Maris dressed like she was headed to a magazine shoot. Hair done, makeup sharp, a dress I'd never seen before. Not girls' night casual, something else. Quick note. Before listening further, share which city or country you're watching from. And let's continue. Nolan was in his room, half studying, half watching game highlights. Maisie had markers spread across the table, humming like nothing in the world had cracks in it. I asked Maris where she was going. She didn't turn around. The girls from the med spa. We're doing a late thing. Like I was furniture. Like I didn't require eye contact. I didn't push. I heated leftovers, asked Maisie about her drawing, kept my voice level. I've learned if you raise your voice, people stop talking and start performing. I didn't need a performance. I needed the truth. Around 8:10, Maris came downstairs with her purse and keys. She paused near the door just long enough for me to feel it, like she'd made a decision and I was the last to know. "Don't wait up," she said. "I never do," I answered. She smiled like she had a secret that made her taller. Then she added, almost bored, "You always just accept things. That's your problem." The line stuck in my throat. Calm. Rehearsed. I smiled back and said nothing, because for 3 weeks, Wade and I had already been hearing more than she knew. The first recorder Wade placed wasn't in her purse. It was in her car, where she talked the freest. That's where the real voice lived. The purse recorder came later. Just a second net for cleaner sound when she stepped away from the driver's seat. When the front door shut, the house went quiet, except for Maisie humming. The man Maris thought she was married to would have begged, or yelled, or fallen apart. I didn't. I opened my notebook, wrote the date and time and added one line, "No more accepting." Then I closed it and pulled up my messages with Wade. I hadn't called Wade on impulse 3 weeks earlier. By the time I wrote that line in my notebook, I'd already been sitting on 3 weeks of doubt that felt too organized to ignore. Maris had started drifting before that Monday. New appointments that landed on the same nights every week. Sudden gym stops that ran long. A sweetness in her voice that didn't belong to me. I told myself it was stress, maybe boredom, maybe I was reading too much into it. But the excuses repeated too clean, like copy and paste. Wade Rourke used to audit casinos before he went private. He's the kind of guy who doesn't waste words and doesn't blink at ugly truths. When I reached out, he didn't ask me why I thought my wife was cheating. He asked, "How quiet do you want this handled?" "As quiet as possible," I told him. "I have kids." He nodded once and said, "Then we stay inside the lane your future attorney can defend. No theatrics, no shortcuts." The first audio clip he pulled was short. 2 minutes. That was all it took to change the air in my lungs. I stood in my laundry room with the dryer humming and listened to Maris in her car, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years. Then a man's voice cut in, easy and confident. "Riss, you're overthinking it. he said. Riss. Not my nickname. Not anything used in our house. They talked about dinner plans and something they called the January window, like they were scheduling a project instead of sneaking around. I heard his name twice before I even processed it. Kip. Kip Ralston. Then Maris said the line she'd thrown at me, but sharper. He's the type who lets things slide. That's how he's built. Kip laughed like he'd already won a prize. I expected to feel rage explode through me. Instead, I felt steady. Calm in a way that scared me more than anger would have. My jaw tightened, but my hands didn't shake. The truth had weight, and I could carry weight. Wade looked at me after the clip ended and said, "Use the audio as a flashlight, not a hammer. It shows you where to look. Court is a different world." I wrote that down exactly. That same week, Crescent Ridge started rattling. We had unexplained losses tied to events, missing VIP wristbands, comp tickets that didn't match head counts, cash from pop-up bars coming up short. Patterns, not accidents. Our CEO, Kurt Ellison, called it noise in a staff meeting and told everyone to stop feeding gossip. Later in his office, he leaned back and said, "Don't turn this into a scandal, Hollis." Scandal was his favorite word. Like the truth was the threat, not the theft. I opened a new file at work the same way I had at home. Dates written out clean, times, names with access, where the blind spots sat. No drama, just facts. A few days later, Wade sent me another clip. Maris again, softer this time. "Duncan says he's on late load-in Tuesday, so you're safe," she told Kip. Duncan, I knew that name. Duncan Reeves supervised access and shift coverage at the arena. He had no reason to be anywhere near my personal life. That was the moment the two storms touched. My marriage mess and my job mess weren't separate anymore. They were sharing the same wind, and I picked up my pen and started drawing the line between them. The next morning, instead of going straight into the office, I drove to the bank. I didn't trust apps and screenshots. Apps can be adjusted. Screenshots can be explained away. Paper is stubborn. Paper doesn't care about your story. I stood at the counter and told the teller I needed printed statements going back about 16 months. She gave me a polite smile that said she thought I didn't understand online banking, but she printed them anyway. The stack was thick when she handed it over, warm from the machine. I took it to my truck, shut the door, and started going line by line with a pen. At first it looked normal: groceries, utilities, school stuff. Then the pattern started to rise. 13 withdrawals. Always on days I worked long events at Crescent Ridge, concert nights, double-header weekends, the kind of shifts where my phone stayed on silent and my brain stayed locked on crowd control and vendor issues. Every withdrawal sat just under the kind of number that triggers a bank call. Not random, calculated. I added them twice to be sure. $18,760. Maris handled the house money because we agreed she would. I wasn't checked out. I was trusting my wife. Looking at that total on paper, I realized that trust had become a leash, and she'd been holding the other end. That night, after Nolan and Maisie went to bed, I walked into the garage to grab a tool and felt it immediately. Something in the storage stack looked off. A plastic bin shifted just enough to break the straight line I always kept. If you've ever worked security, you know the feeling. An inch out of place can scream. I moved the holiday bin and found a duffel bag shoved behind it, zipped tight like it had been closed in a hurry. I carried it to the workbench and opened it slow. Inside were men's dress shoes in a size I don't wear, a toiletry kit that wasn't mine, and stacks of cash wrapped in rubber bands. I counted later when I was alone in the house. $4,480. Under the cash sat a thin folder. I opened it and felt my jaw lock. Flight confirmations. Greenville to Fort Lauderdale. Departure January 9th. 2 passengers, Maris Mercer and Kip Ralston. One way, not a girls' night. Not a break to clear her head. A launch plan. Nolan had been asking about winter break. Maisie had been talking about baking cookies and watching movies in pajamas. Maris had been saying, real casual, maybe we do something different this year. Now I understood what different meant. I took photos of everything exactly where it sat, every stack, every page. Then I put it back the same way, right down to the angle of the zipper. I didn't want an explosion. I wanted comfort. Comfort makes people sloppy. Wade ran Kip Ralston through his system. Kip wasn't some single guy chasing romance. He was married. His wife's name was Reese. They had a kid. He traveled for premium interior showrooms, which meant he always had a clean excuse to be in Greenville. That same week, I booked a consult with a family attorney named Celia Rusk. When I sat in her office and laid out what I had, she didn't start with sympathy. She looked at the stack and asked, "What can you prove without raising your voice?" That was the right question, and I slid the papers across her desk and started answering it. After I closed that notebook, I didn't storm into anyone's office, and I didn't corner Maris in the kitchen. Confrontation is a gift you hand to liars because it gives them time to adjust their story. I wasn't handing out gifts anymore. At Crescent Ridge, I started simple. I pulled access logs and schedule views, nothing fancy and nothing dramatic. Just a quiet look at who viewed what and when. Duncan Reeves's name showed up on my shift calendar more times than it should have. He wasn't my supervisor and he didn't cover my role, so there was no clean reason for him to check where I'd be on specific nights. I began watching his habits the way I would any internal risk. Duncan liked taking calls in a service corridor near one of the loading bays. It was a dead corner with a camera angle that caught mostly ceiling tiles and ductwork. People assume dead corners are private, and that assumption is where they get sloppy. Around the same time, our internal audit flagged a pattern. Losses clustered around events where Duncan controlled credential tables and late load-ins. VIP wristbands came up short in batches. Comp lists had names that didn't match scanned entries. Cash from pop-up bars sometimes landed light without a clean explanation. None of it screamed on its own, but together it formed a rhythm. Kurt Ellison kept repeating, "Keep this quiet, Hollis," and in the same breath he'd add, "You need to wrap this up fast." He talked like theft had a neat ending if you just wished hard enough. I nodded in meetings and kept building my file. When I told Wade what I was seeing, he didn't sound surprised. He said, "Confirm the loop before you move. Make sure the information flows the way you think it does." So I set bait. I created a schedule note that showed I'd be on site late for a Tuesday load-in on a sold-out comedy show. I placed it exactly where Duncan liked to snoop, visible but not announced. Tuesday night, instead of staying at the arena, I came home early and parked a few houses down. I walked in through the side door and heard Maris talking low in the kitchen. She cut herself off mid-sentence when she heard my keys. She turned around, eyes sharp. "I thought you were stuck at the arena tonight." I shrugged and hung my jacket. Shift changed at the last minute. "What's for dinner?" She held my gaze a second too long before smoothing her face. That 1 second told me everything I needed. Someone had told her I'd be gone. Someone had told her wrong. Later that week, Wade sent another clip. Maris's voice was tight but relieved. "Duncan says he's not there after all." she told Kip. "We're clear." That was it. The triangle wasn't theory anymore. It was clean and confirmed. Duncan to Maris to Kip. I opened a new page in my notebook and wrote one sentence across the top. Loop verified. Proceed with legal and workplace timeline together. Then I picked up my phone and scheduled the next meeting that would start closing the net. I made that call to Celia from my truck in her parking lot, and before I even pulled away, my phone rang again. The name on the screen caught me off guard. Nadine Harrow. Maris's mother did not call me unless it was a holiday or a crisis, and she treated both the same way. I answered, and she skipped hello. "I'm not proud of my daughter. I'm calling about the kids." Nadine never wasted air. She talked like she was cutting rope. She told me she'd seen messages pop up on Maris's phone weeks earlier while they were sitting at her kitchen table. Maris had left the room, and Nadine had taken screenshots before handing the phone back like nothing happened. I didn't interrupt her. Silence makes people nervous, and nervous people fill gaps with truth. After a pause, she said, "I will email them to you, but I need your word the kids won't get yanked around like furniture." "You have my word," I said. "They stay steady." I didn't say it to comfort her. I said it because Nolan and Maisie deserved that much. The screenshots came through that night. They were practical, not romantic. Maris and Kip weren't whispering about love. They were coordinating money, timing, and who should file first. It read like a business deal. One line made my stomach go cold. "Attorney DeWitt says we wait until after New Year's. Keep the trip quiet. Mara DeWitt. A family law attorney right here in Greenville?" That meant Maris wasn't floating the idea of leaving. She had already hired counsel and built a runway. Nadine called again 2 days later, and her voice lost some of its edge. "She's been helping me, okay?" I didn't ask for it like this. I let that sit. Helping meant money, debts, probably the same withdrawals I'd seen on paper. "She didn't tell you where it came from?" I asked. "She said she was handling things," Nadine answered, tight and defensive. That twist fit too clean. Maris wasn't just cheating. She was financing an image for herself and her mother, and she was using our accounts to do it. The same week, a smaller crack showed up. Jessa Pryor, Maris's friend and admin at the med spa, slipped. Nolan told me about it in the car after school pickup. He kept his eyes on the road ahead and said, "Jessa asked if I was excited about Mom traveling more with the showroom guy." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What did you say?" I said I didn't know what she was talking about, he replied. She went quiet after that. He looked older in that moment. "Dad, she thinks we're dumb." That one hit harder than the bank totals. I met Celia again the next morning and laid everything out on her desk. Bank statements, flight confirmations, Nadine's screenshots, notes on Duncan and the access leak. Celia scanned the stack without reacting. Then she looked at me and said, "We file first, and we file clean." I nodded once and signed the retainer agreement without hesitation. I left Celia's office with a clear plan, and by the time I reached my truck, Wade had sent me a short message. "Kip's wife wants to talk. She's got documents." That was all it said. No drama, no commentary. Reese Ralston didn't contact me directly because she didn't want a messy phone trace showing up on a shared account. We set it up through Wade, and when she finally called, her voice sounded flat and stripped down. Not shaky, not loud, just controlled. "I found receipts that don't match his travel claims," she said without introduction. "Hotels in Greenville on nights he said he was in Charlotte. Dinner charges here when he claimed he was across the state." She wasn't asking for comfort. She wasn't crying. She was listing facts. Then she asked one question. Is she planning to take your kids? That hit the only point that mattered. There's a one-way flight booked for January 9th, I told her. Greenville to Fort Lauderdale. 2 tickets. She went silent long enough for me to hear her breathing. Then she said, he's using her. Reese explained it like she was breaking down a business model. Kip runs his life like a hustle. He charms people, collects favors, and pushes other people to carry risk. If money moves through your accounts, it looks safer, less traceable back to him. That lined up too well with what I'd found in the garage and on the bank statements. Reese didn't dump a pile of paper on me. She walked me through what she had pulled from their joint accounts and his work portal. Receipts. A travel report he'd altered. A photo of a stack of gift cards purchased the same week as one of Maris's withdrawals. Dates matched. Amounts matched close enough to make the pattern clear. I printed everything at home that night and placed it in a clean stack on my desk. Paper I could hand to a judge without raising my voice. As we kept talking, the work mess and the marriage mess touched again. Reese mentioned Kip bragging about an arena guy who could get him into suites and private areas during events. That guy thinks he's untouchable, she said. I didn't have to guess. Duncan fit that description too neatly. I'm not going to tell you what to do about your marriage, I told her, but my attorney may need a statement if you're willing. I'm willing, she answered without hesitation. Celia reminded me the audio was guidance, not the center. We would lean on bank records, flight confirmations, screenshots, and sworn statements. Clean facts carry more weight than anger. I drove to my dad's place that weekend and told him the basics. Gus Mercer listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Bring the kids here if you need. No questions." I started packing a quiet bag for Nolan and Maisie that night. Extra clothes, school things, medications, a few comfort items. I kept it casual, sliding things into place so it didn't look like a storm was coming. By the end of the week, Celia had an emergency filing ready. I wasn't going to sit back and wait for January 9th to test what Maris thought she could pull off. So I picked up the folder and told Celia to file it first thing Monday morning. After I told Celia to file, everything moved fast. The night before court, I kept my voice steady and told Nolan and Maisie we were doing a couple nights with Grandpa Gus because my work schedule was heavy. Nolan looked at me like he could see straight through it, but he didn't argue. He just helped Maisie zip her backpack and carried it to the car without a word. I barely slept that night. Not because I doubted the case, but because I knew how Maris presented herself when she wanted something. She could sell calm like it was a brand. In court, she showed up polished and composed, dressed like she was heading to a fundraiser instead of a temporary orders hearing. It was mid-November, the kind of docket where judges move fast and don't tolerate drama. Judge Laurel Kincaid walked in with a stack of files and no patience for theater. Mara DeWitt came in hot, confident, loud enough to fill the room before the judge even settled. She painted me as a monitoring husband, leaning hard on my job. He is trained to watch people, she said. He installed surveillance and controls the narrative in his own household. She wanted the judge to see me as some kind of family security camera. Celia didn't rise to the tone. She stood and walked through the timeline like she was laying bricks. Bank statements showing withdrawals that lined up with my long shifts. Flight confirmations with a one-way ticket dated January 9th. Screenshots from Nadine. Receipts and altered travel reports from Reese. A written summary from Wade describing verified meetings and identities without turning it into a circus. Then Celia shifted to the kids. She outlined my daily routines, school drop-offs, homework oversight, and medical appointments. She presented proof that I had already notified the school about safety and pickup protocols once we requested the temporary order. Not panic. Planning. Judge Kincaid asked simple questions that sliced through speeches. Who has been the children's daily anchor? What is the plan if one parent relocates? Why is there a one-way flight? Maris answered like it was a branding issue. She said the trip was just to clear her head and reset. Then she slipped and said, "We thought," before cutting herself off. Mara jumped in fast, but the word had already landed. The judge didn't look impressed. She granted temporary primary custody to me and ordered structured visitation for Maris. It wasn't personal. My timeline held. Hers didn't. Outside the courtroom, Maris stepped close enough that I could smell her perfume. "You couldn't just let it be," she hissed. "These are consequences, not revenge," I said, and walked away before she could answer. 2 days later, she tried to circle around me by calling the school office to ask about early pickup options. The office shut it down because the order was already on file. That wasn't luck. That was paperwork done on time. That night, Nolan stood in the doorway of my dad's guest room and asked, "Are we safe?" "You are with me," I told him. "That's the whole point." He nodded once and went back to bed. And for the first time in months, Maisie slept straight through the night while I sat at the kitchen table updating my timeline for the next move. After I updated that timeline at my dad's kitchen table, I shifted my focus back to Crescent Ridge. The custody order gave me breathing room at home, and that meant I could zero in on the arena without distraction. Duncan wasn't just a guy who leaked my schedule anymore. He was standing too close to missing money that could blow up the entire venue. That week was stacked with events. Big crowds, rotating temp staff, outside vendors, and 1,000 small access points where things could slip. I didn't go flashy. Flashy gets attention too early. I targeted credentials and comp lists because that's where small theft grows legs. I set up a controlled count. Decoy VIP wristbands logged in a separate tally that only 2 people could verify. I also created a sealed envelope of comp codes tied to a specific event. Duncan was one of the 2 authorized to touch that envelope. No gray area, no confusion. I didn't need another schedule trick. I tightened the chain of custody and waited for the numbers to talk. They did. After one sold-out event, the wristband batch came up short in a place it shouldn't have. The count mismatch was small enough to ignore if you wanted to, but precise enough to confirm a leak. At the same time, Wade sent me a photo taken outside a downtown bar. Duncan stood near the entrance, leaning in close to a vendor rep I recognized from recent paperwork. The man was Evan Klein. Reese confirmed it when I forwarded the image. "He's in Kip's showroom circle," she said. "They do client dinners together when he's in town." That connection tightened everything. Duncan, Evan, Kip. Arena access and outside vendors crossing lines. I walked into Kurt Ellison's office with a folder under my arm and laid it out without theatrics. Logs, controlled counts, a memo trail showing I had flagged patterns weeks earlier. The photo from Wade. Kurt's face went tight before I even finished. "Do you understand what a scandal does to sponsorships?" he asked. "I understand what theft does to operations," I answered. "Names are the problem. That's why we're here." He leaned back and said he preferred to handle it internally and keep specific names out of any official report. He talked about optics, like optics paid the bills. I kept my voice steady. "If we bury this and it surfaces later, it won't look controlled. It will look complicit." He didn't like that. but I wasn't there to be liked. I followed protocol. Internal Audit and Venue Counsel made the initial referral to Detective Soren Holdane. I looped Celia in to confirm it wouldn't complicate custody as long as I stuck to documented facts and didn't posture. Duncan sensed the shift. He started arriving early, offering to double-check counts, asking questions that didn't fit his scope. Quiet people get loud when the floor moves under them. By the end of the week, my file was thick and clean. Access logs, controlled counts, Wade's documentation. Email threads showing I escalated concerns before taking anything outside the building. If Kurt tried to paint me as reckless, the paperwork would shut that down. I closed the folder on my desk, locked it in the cabinet, and scheduled a meeting with Detective Holdane for the following morning. After I scheduled that meeting with Detective Holdane, early December rolled in with January staring straight at us. Maris shifted her tone almost overnight. The sharp comments faded. The cold distance softened into something rehearsed. She started offering to talk and asking about healthy co-parenting, like she just discovered the phrase. "We don't have to make this ugly," she told me one evening when she dropped the kids off. "Let's not make the kids miserable." Her voice sounded gentle, but I could hear the script under it. At the same time, the bank alerts started lighting up again. Attempted transfers that didn't match regular bills. Cash withdrawal attempts just under reporting thresholds. Celia reviewed the activity and didn't sugarcoat it. "This is the runway," she said over the phone. "She's trying to launch before the full hearing." Nolan gave me another piece of it without meaning to. He told me Maris had asked him, "Would you want to live near the beach for a while?" Like it was some fun adventure. "What did you say?" I asked him. He looked down at his hands. "I said you would never agree." He wasn't trying to be loyal in that moment. He was scared. I didn't explode. That was the difference between reacting and finishing. I had stayed quiet for weeks, so that when I moved once and everything landed together. On a Thursday morning, tight window before the weekend, Celia filed an emergency motion tied directly to the one-way January 9th flight and the recent transfer attempts. At the same time, we requested a temporary freeze on large withdrawals from the joint accounts pending review. Not dramatic, just controlled. That same day, I sent a formal packet to Kip's employer's compliance line. No insults, no emotional language, just dates, receipts, altered travel reports, and documentation suggesting he used work travel to conduct the affair and possibly coordinate with venue access through Evan Klein. Reese submitted her own documentation from her side. 2 angles, same timeline. Wade delivered his report to Detective Holdane's desk before close of business. Vendor connection. Duncan's controlled count discrepancies. The photo of the envelope exchange. That shifted the arena issue from internal annoyance to official interest. Kurt got a courtesy notice from legal that law enforcement had been contacted. He stormed into my office with his jaw tight. "You went outside the building," he said. "I followed protocol and escalated when internal handling stalled," I answered. "You were copied on every warning." He had no clean counter. I had the emails. Maris discovered the account freeze at a retail counter when her card declined. My phone rang minutes later. "What did you do?" she demanded, voice sharp and shaking. "I protected the kids and the accounts," I said, and ended the call before she could spin it. That afternoon, Duncan was pulled into HR. He tried to resign immediately, like quitting would erase the paper trail. It doesn't. It didn't come apart with slow-motion drama and music playing. It came apart through emails, official notices, compliance reviews, and calendar invites that carried weight. By the end of that week, the January plan wasn't a threat anymore. It was dead on paper, stamped and filed, before it could turn into something my kids would have to survive. By the time the dust settled, months had passed, and I found myself sitting on cold aluminum bleachers in a Greenville middle school gym watching Nolan run drills. The echo of sneakers on polished wood bounced off the walls, and Maisie sat beside me with a hot chocolate, swinging her legs like she was trying to kick the air back into place. This was the part nobody warns you about, the quiet stability that only feels precious after you almost lose it. The court never destroyed Maris. She handled that on her own. The judge just drew clear lines around the kids and made it plain what happens when adults cross them. Primary custody stayed with me because the routines were already built and documented. Visitation shifted from supervised to normal only after Maris followed every condition and proved she could keep the kids' schedules steady without drifting. Restitution came in slow, scheduled installments. Paperwork, oversight, monitored transfers. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. The $18,760 didn't stay gone, and the $4,480 in hidden cash became evidence instead of leverage. I cared more about balance being restored than about watching her fall. Reese finalized her divorce from Kip before spring. I did not celebrate, but I also did not lose sleep over him. His employer let him go after the compliance review concluded that altered reports and overlapping travel claims were not misunderstandings. Receipts do not care how charming you are at dinner. He lost his marriage and his job in the same season, and that was the cost of treating people like stepping stones. Duncan was terminated and ended up under investigation tied to the arena losses. Detective Haldane told me later that Duncan tried to frame it as just helping a friend. But controlled counts and time-stamped logs do not bend to friendship. Wade's timeline held tight. Kurt Ellison kept his position, but he stopped saying keep it quiet like it was policy. After everything, he started asking, "What do you need documented?" That was as close to an apology as I would ever get. Nadine paid down her debts the hard way once the truth came out. She never became warm, but she showed up for Nolan and Maisie without trying to steer the room, and that was enough. Maris tried once to reach for the old line. "You never used to fight like this," she said after a pickup. "I'm not fighting," I answered. "I'm parenting." That ended it. Most of what I learned came from sources that do not lie. Bank statements, court filings, Wade's reports, Reese's documentation, and the quiet admissions people make when the game is finished. When Nolan sinks a clean shot and Maisie grabs my arm to make sure I saw it, I do not think about revenge. I think about timing, paperwork, and staying calm. Maris thought I would swallow anything. What I accepted was responsibility. And then I changed the board by standing up and walking my kids out of the gym into steady night air. Hold up before you scroll. If you were in my shoes, would you stay quiet and document everything, or confront right away and risk losing control of the outcome? If you've got the hype feature, tap it to support this video and help it reach more people. And please subscribe and like because it really matters and it's one click. Then drop a comment, even good story, or tell me what you would have done.